Hello and welcome. You're watching To The Point on the day the American president spoke movingly but candidly to the people of India just hours before he left the country. His town hall speech at Sri Fort was full of personal revelations, an emotional commitment to partnership with the sisters and brothers of India, a strong moral position on women and youth, but most significantly, a clear message of advice, if not a warning, to the Modi government to respect freedom of religion as well as the right to propagate one's faith. So tonight we start by discussing that powerful and personal speech. Later at 8 o'clock, we'll pause to hear the Obama-Modi Man Ki Baat and then turn to discuss that as well. My guests are three former foreign secretaries, Krishnan Srinivasan joining us from Calcutta, Lalit Man Singh in studio with me, Kamal Sibal from Delhi. Joining us from America, the Financial Times chief commentator Edward Luce, and a senior fellow of the Brookings Institution and author of India Emerging Power, Stephen Cohen. And here in Delhi, the strategic affairs editor of the Business Standard, Ajay Shukla, and the diplomatic editor of The Hindu, Suhasini Heather. Srinivasan, let's start with what many saw as a very powerful message, if not actually a warning, to Mr. Modi and the BJP about respecting religious freedom. President Obama said, and I'm quoting him, "Every person has a right to practice their faith as they choose. Nowhere is that more important than in India." In your eyes, is that a clear reference to the Ghar Wapsi and Love Jihad campaigns and perhaps also to the Hindutva statements made by ministers and RSS leaders?
Yes, certainly it is. I don't think it can be interpreted in any other way at all. And he, I think, went on to talk about responsibility of the government and of each person. So it's a very direct and pointed reference. I'd suggest there are two possible reasons for this, though it will probably upset the Prime Minister's supporters, that firstly, he has a constituency in America that would have expected him to raise this question, and attacks on churches particularly is a very emotional question there. And the second reason, maybe it's a bit far-fetched, perhaps the Prime Minister is shooting from his guest's shoulder. I have no reason to believe that, but I just put it forward to you.
All right, but the second is a generous interpretation. We could come to that in a moment's time later. Ajay Shukla, I'm going to quote something else the President said. India will succeed so long as it's not splintered along lines of religious faith. Diversity is our strength, and we have to guard against any effort to divide us along sectarian lines. Isn't that, in a sense, telling the Prime Minister that his silence over Love Jihad and Ghar Wapsi could endanger India's future, and more importantly, his plans for India's future?
Before that, you could very safely say that anything that he said in public had been already conveyed to Mr. Modi more forcefully in private. The public statement would have been the diplomatic, toned-down version of the message. I see two clear components of a message like this. The first is the real component, the realism component, where Mr. Obama realizes and is conveying to Mr. Modi that the bipartisan support that India enjoys from all sections of the US polity depends on this image of India as a multi-faith, multi-religious, multi-ethnic, secular country, which appeals to the American sense of what a national identity should be. And he is telling him that my continued support across that political spectrum depends on India remaining as such. But he's also telling him, and he's not telling him this, but this is where that emotion comes from, is America's own battles with various forms of divisiveness along race, along ethnic. This is a battle that America has waged and which forms a fundamental part of the American identity. It's a battle that is waged every day on the streets of America. So I think these two messages are messages that India should listen to and Mr. Modi should listen to very carefully.
In fact, as you phrase it, they're more than messages, they're warnings.
I would put it that way. Things cannot continue unless this happens.
You know, Mr. Man Singh, the President was very clever in the way he put that message of warning, because he quoted from the Indian Constitution. He referred to Article 25, which, as he himself pointed out, guarantees the right to profess, practice, and propagate one's faith. And then he immediately after that added, upholding this freedom is the responsibility of the government. Isn't that yet one more reminder that the government must stand up for these freedoms and it can't take recourse to either convenient, leave aside pusillanimous silence.
Well, I think we're reading too much into that speech.
But why do you say that?
I say that because President Obama, having had a very successful visit, wouldn't like to leave India on this note, which should be interpreted as a slap on the wrist for the Prime Minister.
But he has left on that note, and it has been interpreted that way.
I think the speech is a very reflective speech. It's in line with our philosophical thinking. He was addressing the Indian public, especially the Indian youth. He was talking about the inspiration he received from the American system, which enabled him to go, say, from the log house to the White House. And similarly, he saw India as a reflection of the United States, sharing these values. I don't think there was a message there for the government.
Let me stop you there. We've got a very interesting difference, if not division, of opinion between you on the one hand and Chris Srinivasan and Ajay Shukla on the other. Let me bring in a voice from America. Professor Stephen Cohen is there with us. Professor Cohen, how do you read those passages of the President's speech? Was it advice or a warning, as some people in the studio in Delhi are suggesting? Or was it much more innocent and innocuous, much more reflective and not at all politically pointed? Which do you think it was?
I hope you can hear me. I would agree with the latter view. That he could not have given that speech or made those remarks in either Pakistan or China. I think he was pleased to make those comments in India. It was also appealing or explaining to his own constituency that here he was visiting a man who had been under U.S. sanctions for many years and was embracing him in his own country. So I think it was. I wouldn't take it too seriously, but I would say that it does indicate India's distinctiveness. He could not have said those words in Islamabad or Beijing.
Absolutely. No one denies he couldn't have said that in Beijing and Islamabad. But I want to ask you again, was there a pointed message there for Mr. Modi and the BJP? Or was it just a coincidence that this speech talking about religious freedom happened just weeks or months after love jihad and conversion campaigns were such a controversy in India?
No, I think it's just sort of a general statement of American support for human rights and appealing to his own constituency, the liberal wing of the Democratic Party, that here he was telling these things. I don't think they had to be said, in fact. I think the Indians understand these issues very well, but clearly the appeal was to his own left-wing party, the human rights faction of his own party, to justify his trip to India.
Constable, we have a very interesting difference of opinion between two of your predecessor foreign secretaries. Chris Srinivasan, who has no doubt that this was a message and a warning, although he half hopes that in fact maybe Mr. Modi is using his friend to fire off the friend's shoulders. And on the other hand, you have Lalit Mansingh, who believes that we're reading too much into this speech, that no president would want to end his visit on that sort of down note. Now, you're a former foreign secretary. You're in the business of interpreting speeches. How do you interpret this speech? Innocuous and reflective, or a shot across Mr. Modi's bows?
You know, if I were to accept what is being said by some of the panelists and the way you are interpreting it, I would say that this speech was totally uncalled for. And it was wrong on Obama's part to try and give sermons to India on religious tolerance and quote our constitution to us. We all know this very well ourselves. We don't need the Americans to tell us, who have to attend to a lot of their own domestic problems. I just don't agree with another panelist who says that Modi would have been warned by Obama in private that the future of Indo-US relations would hinge upon India making sure that its constitution is respected and religious tolerance is observed. I just don't believe that Obama would have adopted such a tone and given such a warning. This never happens. He may not even have raised the subject at all, or if he did, he raised it extremely politely and indirectly, and hoping that the Prime Minister of India would understand his predicament, that he has a constituency back home to whom he has which he has to address. In this case, I think he has made statements which are liable to be misunderstood. They were not necessary, and I don't think that he has love jihad or such petty things, ghar wapsi things in mind. From the American perspective, these are small domestic internal issues, and for the President of the United States to make this as the basis of his speech would, to my mind, be utterly ridiculous.
You're sort of suggesting, Kamal Sibal, that in fact the president has said things
think
without
Obama was
realizing
out
that
of
they
line,
could be
whatever his
misinterpreted
intention.
and misunderstood. I want to bring in Edward Luce. Edward Luce has been both the Financial Times chief of bureau in
Absolutely.
India. He's played the same function in Washington. Now he's the chief commentator in Washington. Edward, you understand this country. Now, the president quoted Gandhi when he said, different religions are like beautiful flowers from the same garden, and they are all branches of the same majestic tree. And then he added, religion must not be used to tap into the darkest impulses of man. Would the president be aware, as all of us in India are, that not so long ago the head of the RSS claimed that Christians had converted so many Hindus it was tantamount to loot, or that leaders of the Bajrang Dal had said that they wanted to do mass conversions of Christians on Christmas Day because they wanted it to be seen as a test of the strength of Christianity? Would he have been aware of that when he made these comments? Or is it just a coincidence? Or could it be, as Kamal Sibal says, that he said things without realizing how they'll be understood, and therefore there's a certain irresponsibility in his statements? Oh, we've lost Ed Luce. Sahashni, let me put that to you. You're the diplomatic editor of The Hindu. Would you answer that question?
Well, to begin with, Karan, because so many have spoken before me, I was actually there in the audience watching that speech firsthand, and I can tell you there was nothing accidental or general about what President Obama was saying over there. Of the 40 minutes where he spoke, at least 20 minutes of a speech that was supposed to be about the way forward in Indo-US ties was spent on really countering inequality. In that statement on inequality, where he spoke about gender inequality, about poverty and all the rest, really he spent practically 2 paragraphs on the subject of religious freedom. I don't think there was any kind of accident about what he was saying over there. I would also counter what Mr. Cohen just said, that really he couldn't have said this anywhere else, and he was really pitching to his domestic constituency, simply because I don't think religious freedom is as much of a concern perhaps inside the United States. It is a concern for this administration, which has chosen to put India on its religious freedom report even as late as last year. But I don't think, as I said, that there was any accident about what he was saying. They were very carefully chosen words. And I do find myself a little bit in agreement with Mr. Sibal when I say I'm not sure this was the forum. If he had issues about religious freedom in India, then they should have been brought up when he was face-to-face with Mr. Modi. Perhaps he discussed it in his Man Ki Baat, which we will find out in a little while from now. But I really don't think this was the place to be lecturing India on the Constitution. We've seen the US President last time he was in India also give India a bit of a lecture on Myanmar, or Burma as he called it, to find that the Americans changed their position on that. But I would say that the statement he made in City Fort today was an extremely strong statement on religious freedom, on the need for religious tolerance, and a reminder to Indians, if you like, about Article 25.
Christian Avasan, you were very clear in your interpretation and your understanding of what the president was saying, and you were fairly certain that there was a message he was communicating to Mr. Modi and the government. Let me ask you a slightly different question. Do you think, given that this was his last public speech, given just hours before he left the country, it was the wrong moment to do so? That as a result, he's left on a slightly down, perhaps even slightly sour note?
Yes,
or
I'd
was
agree
that
with
necessary?
I think it was ungracious. I think he was speaking in the context of discrimination, but with a reference specifically to an article of our Constitution. I think it made it appear to look certainly as if it was a broadside against the present government. And to that extent, I think it is going to rake controversy, and controversy on the eve of a departure of a state guest in India surely is not something either the government as the host or Mr. Obama as the guest would have wanted to see. Except that, I'll say again, it was obviously a scripted speech. It's quite possible that the government did know some elements of the speech in advance. I just put it forward again that we know our Prime Minister has difficulties with various
you may be being kind to the Prime Minister.
Or other parties. Let me say that again. It is possible that the guest said something that perhaps the Prime Minister wanted him to say.
Well, yes, but I can't believe that the Prime Minister asked the guest to say it, which is what would have to happen if he was firing off his shoulders. I mean, truly, that becomes implausible. How do you think the Prime Minister will respond at the end of a visit where clearly the hospitality was generous, the two countries have converged in strategic terms, there's been so much commonality between them, and then there's this note on which it ends? Many welcome it. Clearly, the Prime Minister won't. So how will the Prime Minister respond to this?
Well, that's exactly why I feel that I think we're reading too much into this speech. Obama was not speaking as the President of the United States, lecturing the Indian public and the Indian government.
But he is President of the United States. He can't shed the job.
No, but he was speaking as a friend, philosopher, guide, man who thinks he's comfortable enough in his friendship with India to speak candidly to the Indian people, giving the American example, talking about common values and saying, look, this is your tradition, this is our tradition. He was, in fact, as an admirer of Vivekananda, was giving what I would call a pravachan, which is a common thing in India, where you just speak your mind about everything around you, including morals and politics and everything else.
Let me put that to you, because you were very definite in your interpretation. Even if you accept the line that he was speaking as a friend, philosopher and guide, might he not be targeting those remarks at least partly at Mr. Modi? And because he feels he's now a friend of Mr. Modi, he can be candid in a way in which otherwise a head of government cannot be.
Karan, I think presidents of the United States on state visits, and especially state visits to close friends, don't speak as friend philosophers and guides. They speak as presidents of the United States. Every word of their speech is debated and dissected before it comes. And in the case of Mr. Obama, we know that he personally vets his speeches before they are actually delivered. So I think that to suggest that this was either a mistaken message or conveyed casually or not given with the full weight of the office of the President of the United States is disingenuous. I think this was very carefully calibrated. It was serving a particular political purpose. The United States was conveying to India that we are a very good friend, we are natural partners, and well, allies is a bad word now, but there are certain common values that would have to be conveyed. Remember also that Mr. Obama was the president who personally grappled with this visa issue when Mr. Modi was coming up for re-election. And one ambassador of this country has apparently gone home, perhaps prematurely, because she did not engage with Mr. Modi early enough. I think that there was a clear understanding of what he was doing and a clear message that he was giving, not just to Mr. Modi, though he was giving it to Mr. Modi, but across the Indian polity.
Kamal Sibal, let me bring it, Kamal Sibal, then I'll come to you. Kamal Sibal, there's been no response from the Prime Minister at all, and I don't believe there will be, because I think the Prime Minister certainly won't want to look and give the impression that he's locking in some discord with his guests. Is there a danger that members of the BJP, perhaps spokesmen of the party, may take it upon themselves to say something, perhaps an acerbic comment, perhaps an expression that this was distasteful of the president? And how wrong would it be if BJP spokesmen were to make that sort of comment?
See, two things. One, of course, that I think Obama was very poorly advised. He should have been told the Indian press is very feisty, and there are no limits to the kind of discussions that they can generate. And this is a hot button, sensitive issue domestically, and the press will play it up. Nevertheless, he went ahead and said this. Now, the problem for the supporters of Prime Minister Modi and the BJP bigwigs in general is that if they pay too much attention to this issue, then they will, in a sense, be spoiling the mood. Because the mood is of euphoria of the Prime Minister having succeeded in refurbishing our ties with the United States, and it was a big diplomatic success. And then it would appear as if at the end of the day, the parting guest slapped Prime Minister Modi and the BJP in the face. They wouldn't want to take the risk. But I'm afraid not only the press, but the opposition will play this up and milk it to the last drop to say that even Obama has warned Prime Minister Modi against what some BJP and RSS chaps are doing on the ground. I think it's very unfortunate, and Prime Minister and Obama was very badly advised.
My last question before I take a break, and then we prepare ourselves for Man Ki Baat, where the two heads of government were doing their joint radio broadcast. So, Hashni Heather, any sense of any response from the government so far?
Not at all. In fact, I think nobody wants to make that comment simply because this is something that is so sensitive, not just for the government that is facing criticism, but particularly for Prime Minister Modi, who has spent the most part of the last few days with President Obama. Remember, it was his gesture to go to the United States without making any mention of the visa ban on him for all these years. And the fact that President Obama may have, in a sense, sent a parting shot on his way out of Delhi, given this statement on religious freedom as directed at him, means that this is something that the Prime Minister is going to have to respond to before anyone else can really take a cue on how they should respond.
What would your advice to the Prime Minister be?
Karan, I'm willing to place a bet that before this snowballs into a controversy, there will be a clarification from the White House saying President Obama did not mean any offense. This was not.
You expect a clarification from the White House very quickly?
I do expect
All right,
it,
gentlemen,
yes.
let's leave it there. We're going to have to take a break. Shortly on the other side, there's going to be the two heads of government, Man Ki Baat, their joint radio broadcast. Let's see what they have to say there. Let's see if there are more surprises. We'll be back at the other side with Man Ki Baat.